So 2025 was a year that exposed many uncomfortable truths, inconvenient realities, and comforting illusions. Illusions about, say, American reliability, illusions about the global order many have become accustomed to, or illusions about whether values or principles alone are enough. From Trump's return to hard-edged transactional politics, to Putin doubling down on coercion and hard power, to China tightening its grip over markets, supply chains, strategic industries, or simply a return to much more frequent and upscaled conflicts. One thing is clear: the world is far harsher, more competitive, and less forgiving. And for those who live, say, in Europe or more broadly the West, well, it means that these consequences are no longer ones that can be ignored. You see, over the past year, and especially today, I've been doing a lot of reflecting, not just on events as they've unfolded, but on how they've reshaped my own views about power, strategy, and what it actually takes for, say, the West to succeed in a world that is inherently more unstable. What many of you who've joined me on the channel in this year have come to know me call the international disorder. So this video is a bit different in that I want to take a step back from the day-to-day headlines and talk about my main takeaway from this year. Because after everything we've seen, politically, economically, militarily, I have become more clear, convinced of one specific thing: that the West needs to be far more realistic, pragmatic about how it survives and competes in the world that we currently exist in. It's not foregoing moral clarity. It's just being a lot more clear on how those morals or principles are applied. You see, for roughly the past 3 decades, or basically my entire life, Western policy has built on many assumptions: that globalization would soften rivalries, that economic integration would moderate behavior, and that institutions would substitute for power. Values based on Western predominant ones would eventually be universal. And for a while, that worldview felt somewhat true or even vindicated to some. But this year, more than many have exposed just how fragile and frankly incorrect, short-sighted those assumptions are. Russia hasn't moderated or acted in that way. It's simply militarized even more. China hasn't liberalized, as many assumed it would after it joined the WTO 25 years ago. It's consolidated its power. And the United States, despite what it claims, is inconsistent and hasn't stabilized. It's become only more unpredictable again under the MAGA movement and Trump. And Europe, frankly, has discovered just how exposed it is, be that in energy, defense, technology, migration, demographics, or productivity. These aren't abstract debates anymore. They're structural weaknesses. For years, Europe could afford to treat energy, defense, industrial capacity as background issues, technocratic ones, that could be managed quietly in the background whilst largely enjoying things. But this year has made it clearer more than ever around the core questions of power. If you can't produce energy cheaply, defend your own borders credibly, or sustain your own industrial base, your foreign policy, your overall existence becomes much more performative than it is effective. Again, this is not critical of Europe for critique's sake. It's because we want Europe to succeed. We want Western values to be upheld whilst also understanding the realities of what's happening around us. So this is here where I want to be very clear, because people often misunderstand this. Having a moral position is not the same as having a workable strategy. For me personally, I believe countries have the right to sovereignty. Morally, aggression should always be condemned, resisted. Morally, democratic societies should always be defended and upheld. But strategy doesn't operate in the world of ideals or vacuums. It operates in the world of constraints: geography, demography, industrial capacity, political cohesion, social unity. This year, therefore, reinforced some very uncomfortable but unavoidable aspects. You can be morally right and strategically unprepared at the same time. And when that happens, morality isn't going to save you. Indeed, we can call out, condemn many things, but if we're not actually willing to follow through, then it only makes it more hollow. Ukraine, of course, is what we primarily have focused on. Supporting Ukraine is morally justified. Resisting Russian coercion matters. but this year also forced a harder conversation. What can realistically be sustained? At what cost and for how long? Europe has committed tens of billions, and that's not nothing. But Europe also faces many issues that could impede its own defence further down the line. Uncontrolled migration, weakening growth, declining productivity, underfunded defence, political fragmentation. A principled but pragmatic approach, therefore, means recognising that foreign commitments cannot hollow out domestic resilience. If your society weakens internally, you lose the ability to project strength externally. This is the contradiction that Europe especially hasn't fully reckoned with yet. A sense of complacency or just things might get better in the future, kick the can down the road expression. We'll talk about long-term commitments abroad while neglecting the political and economic foundations that make those commitments credible. Support without sustainability is never strategy. It's just wishful thinking and something that we are beginning to see change, but must absolutely be gotten right next year. And this is where my thinking has sharpened most of all. Europe has to relearn something quite basic, that foreign policy actually starts at home. Borders matter, not ideologically, but practically. Defence matters, not rhetorically, but materially. Economic strength matters, because without it, nothing else follows. Welfare states that can disincentivize productivity, for example. Migration systems that have eroded trust in the establishments that, well, are better placed than any radical fringe groups could. These are not, therefore, moral victories. They are strategic liabilities, because when voters feel insecure, poorer, or just ignored, support for any outward-looking foreign policy collapses. Domestic weakness doesn't just limit what governments can do abroad. It reshapes what societies are willing to tolerate at all. You know I'm firmly against any idea of isolationism, and I've never been a full supporter of globalism either. I try to tackle along a pretty moderate centrist approach on certain things. Of course, it depends on what the issue is. But in this case, a principled, pragmatic approach seems like an important step for Europe to look at, for the West to review, to modernise, to update how they engage internationally. Now, and this is crucial, pragmatism does not mean surrender. It does not mean neutrality in the face of aggression. It does not mean abandoning our values, though, either. And it certainly does not mean passivity. What it means, in my mind, right now, which of course, as we see what happens next year, will continue to evolve and adapt, what life is about, talking to adversaries because escalation has costs, deterring rivals because dialogue alone doesn't work, and competing economically rather than moralizingly helplessly. Being outraged doesn't get you anywhere. Defending democratic values by making them functional again. In other words, what I'm saying is strength first, sermons second. That means rebuilding deterrence, not assuming it, competing economically, not outsourcing that resilience, which is what Europe has done with America and its over-reliance, and making sure that democracies work at home before trying to say this is what you should do to other countries, which are frankly tired of these rhetorics from Western nations. And so if I had to summarise my takeaway in one line, keeping in mind that there are plenty of channels that will simply try to trigger you emotionally, manipulate you through rhetoric, rage bait you. That's not what I want to do on this channel. I genuinely want you to be engaged intellectually and to reflect and try to evolve as we continue to navigate this world together. This one line would simply be that the West, or Europe especially, doesn't need to abandon its values. It needs to defend them with realistic, pragmatic means. Those means consisting of selective engagement, not permanent intervention, strategic autonomy, not dependency on anyone, enforced rules, not performative ones, and domestic resilience before purely global ambition. The world isn't ending. We're not going to see World War III, despite what others will claim, but it is hardening. And that uncomfortable truth, the inconvenient reality, is that countries that adapt fastest won't be the loudest or the most moralizing. They'll be the ones willing to face reality early. That's the lesson of this year for me, and what I think you should consider as well. Because if Europe wants a future as a serious actor, not just a lecture hall, needs to start acting like one. But that's it from me, everyone. Thank you very much for watching all of this year, for subscribing, for liking, for commenting. It's been an absolute pleasure engaging with you all. I'm wearing a shirt that many of you said you liked, and well, it is my festive get-up as I go out to see out the new year properly. And well, you may well be thinking, what on earth are you doing? Get off the internet, go outside, get out there, live life. And I say the same to all of you. Thanks very much. Happy New Year. See you next time.